The Pentagon Challenge is the hardest challenge in Football Manager. Starting unemployed with no coaching badges and Sunday League experience, your goal is to win the Champions League on all 5 continents. But as a 7-time Streamer Showdown winner and Football Manager world record holder, I should breeze through all that, right? Right. It's safe to say a save like this is well out of my English non-league comfort zone, so as a precaution, I've pre-graded my manager's hair so we can pretend it wasn't caused by stress later in the save, created the worst set of attributes in FM history, and I'm ready to go on an adventure. So strap yourself in, subscribe to the channel and turn your notifications on, leave a like if you haven't already, and let me know down in the comments how many seasons you think it will take for me to win all 5 trophies. With very little in the way of attributes to play with, I decided to focus all 4 of my spare points into adaptability, which should make it slightly easier for my manager to settle into new countries and learn languages, and also set pieces so my game plan can be to sign the tallest players on each continent and aim for their heads. In the interest of stopping my computer from exploding, I didn't load up every league in the game from the start, figuring I'd start my journey with the smaller leagues and work my way up from there, so I loaded up every league in Asia, Africa and North America, and then as soon as we finished the first one, we'll add in South America to replace it, and then aim to finish the journey in Europe with 3 continents always fully loaded to again try and keep everything in the save as balanced as possible. And with English as my only language, I set off to start applying for every job going, hoping for something to come up in the US, Canada or Australia, because a language boost would start us off nicely while I get some coaching badges done. There were precisely 0 jobs available in any of those leagues. So I just applied for everything and waited for the job offers to roll in, and goodness me, did I score some air miles over the next couple of weeks, because I had interviews in South Korea, China, Japan, Malaysia, South Africa and Indonesia before I finally got a job offer from Milford FC in the South African 2nd tier. Milford are newly promoted to the 2nd tier and the media predict will go straight back down again, but we do somehow have one of the best players in the league, 30-year-old striker Mike Gamady, who earns more than double what our next highest player does and over 10% of our total wage budget. So the job is simple: build the team around him and hope he scores enough goals to keep us up before his 1-year contract runs out. The club were already well over their wage budget when I arrived, so if I was going to be able to do my usual transfer wheeler dealing, we'd have to shift some players out first. But there were a lot of promising young players in the development centre, or at least promising by Milford standards, so we might not need to do loads of transfers. I promoted all of them to the first team squad and somehow managed to convince the board to let me go even further over the wage budget to sign a 38-year-old right back who played 1 game for South Africa 12 years ago on almost as much money as Gamady, and a young winger on loan before they cut me off completely. But I'm actually pretty happy with the squad and they seem to fit rather nicely into a 4-2-4, with the entire game plan being focused on getting the ball out wide and whipping crosses into Gamady to score all the goals, which is exactly how we scored our first goal of the challenge to win our opening game 1-0 against a Marumo Gallants side that were playing in the Premiership last year. Maybe we're not as bad as the media would have you believe. We then squeezed in no wage contribution loans before the transfer deadline to plug the last couple of gaps in the squad and kept on winning games, with Gamady living up to his hype as a proper poacher, feeding on all of the chances created by the wide players. 8 games into the season, we received a very welcome £25,000 for winning the first period of the championship. I have no idea what that means, other than it just being an opportunity to hand out some money. Looking at the league rules, it seems like there's 4 periods over the course of the season, each with a £25,000 prize, and they don't lead to a playoff or anything. It's just a normal league table at the end of the season to decide the promotion and relegation, and we didn't get a first period trophy. But considering we're already 100k in debt, the money definitely comes in handy. Gamady is still terrorising the league with 6 goals in 8 matches, and he's formed a great partnership with loanee winger Sianda Hlangabeza. I'm going to try not to say that name too many times, who has 6 goals of his own plus 4 assists. We were still top of the league at the mid-season break with Gamady and Hlangabeza. It sounds Welsh when I say it. With Gamady and his mate first and third in the goal-scoring charts, and with an impressive 5-2 win over second-place JDR Stars under our belts. But we did start to wobble a little bit just before the break with a 3-3 home draw against pre-season title favourites Baroka and a defeat to third-place Maritzburg, highlighting that we can be a little iffy defensively easily against the teams pushing for promotion. Oh, and we're now over £300,000 in debt as well. And I promise you, this is not my fault this time. We tried to fix the defensive issues during the January window, bringing in 6'4" goalkeeper Bontul Malefi on loan from Kaiser Chiefs, but we had to pay a salary contribution, so that only made the money situation worse. We started things up again after the break with a solid 2-0 win over the excellently named City Rovers before losing against Marumo Gallants and Uppington City in the league, either side of being knocked out of the cup by Cape Town Spurs. We recovered with a 5-game unbeaten run that included a 7-1 win where we scored 3 penalties, all scored by a man who'd never scored a goal in his career before. That got us back up to second place with 7 games to go, which would be enough to qualify us for the promotion playoff, and it was at this point where the board offered me a 1-year contract and I had to make my first big decision of the save, which I did by turning them down. Although we're looking good to at least be in the playoffs and could conceivably still go up as champions, we're now over £500,000 in debt, have an average attendance of around 300, and our star man's nearly 31, out of contract at the end of the season, and we can't afford to renew him. So rather than committing to another year here that'll either be another season in this league, but a harder one without Gamady and the ongoing money issues, or a relegation battle in the league above, I'm going to back myself to be able to use this season's success to get a better job when this contract expires. And I don't really stand to lose much either, because I've done so well here that if my contract does run all the way down, they'll probably just offer me another one anyway. We kept our unbeaten run going for another 5 matches before losing 3-2 to Baroka in our penultimate game, leaving us going to the final game of the season 1 point behind Maritzburg United, who we play at home on the final day. Win this match and we're promoted as champions. Maritzburg had already beaten us earlier in the season to knock us off the top of the league in the first place, but after our recent form, our hopes were high until the 3rd minute when they scored. We then lost our heads and gifted them a second after 12 minutes and then missed a header to let them in for their 3rd on 27. There were supposedly over 600 people in our ground for this title decider, but not many were left by the time we rubber-stamped our own ineptitude in the 70th minute by missing a penalty, and now we had to go into the playoffs knowing that every time we played against a top 3 team this season, we bottled it. Which is ideal in the playoffs. The playoff mini-league sees us face off against Swallows, who finished 15th in the Premiership, and Kasrick Stars, who were second behind us for the first half of the season before we both fumbled our form, but we have beaten them both times we've played them, so fingers crossed. Our first match was at home to Swallows, with Gamady opening the scoring after 26 minutes before Swallows equalised at the start of the second half, and Hlanga Beza nodded in the winner at the far post on 75 minutes. We then thumped Kasrick Stars 5-1 away before losing to Swallows, leaving us going into the final match just needing to avoid defeat at home to a Kasrick Stars team we'd already comfortably beaten 3 times this season. And everything was going to plan with us 2-0 up at half-time before we decided to make things interesting, letting Kasrick score twice and have another disallowed in the second half before holding on for victory and promotion. I think. Because we got a very confusing inbox message saying we got promoted but missed out on the title on the final day. Luckily, they did realise the next morning and then sent me all the usual emails, and I'm now pretty confident season 1 has been a success. But my contract now runs out in 2 weeks, so it's time to find a new job or sign a new contract. There are 3 jobs available in South African Premiership, so I applied for all 3, but really had my eye on Orlando Pirates, who played in the Champions League this season, getting knocked out in the group stage, so should be a good team to build back up to that level, compared to Golden Arrows, who narrowly missed out on relegation, and Cape Town Spurs, who only got promoted to the top league the year before we did, and they're both a lot less attractive. But all 3 are much bigger clubs than Milford, so if any of them want me, I'll be packing my bags. Failing that, there are plenty of vacancies in Asia that I could probably get, but now I've started in Africa, I kind of want to finish the job here before moving on. I got interviews at all 3 clubs, but Orlando Pirates decided to go with Quinton Fortune, presumably based on his glowing CV that includes being reserves coach at Cardiff, Manchester United under-23's assistant manager, a coach at Reading, and most recently assistant manager of Deportivo Guadalajara in Mexico. New enemy unlocked. I had more joy with Cape Town Spurs though, who despite having a trophy cabinet as empty as their name would suggest, are the next biggest available job, and they offered me a 1-year contract, a nice little pay rise, and instructions to finish mid-table next season, which based on some quick Kev maths is exactly where they finished this season, 8th in a 16-team league, so as long as I don't make them worse than they already are, I should do enough to either earn a longer deal or a move on to another bigger club. And fingers crossed they'll also let me do some more of of my coaching badges because Milford wouldn't let me go beyond my National C licence because they were worried I'd leave them for a bigger club if I did more. How'd that work out for you, Milford? And it looks like we've got a solid base to work with at Cape Town, with some very talented young players at the club for us to build around, most notably the brilliantly named Luke Bartman, who's already a 4-star current ability player at 18 years old, and 22-year-old 6'4" centre-back Rushwin Dortley, who I'm sure I'm going to get on swimmingly with. My best coaching attributes are still set pieces and working with youngsters, so it feels like I'm made for this squad of players, which is just as well, because there's no money here either, but at least they've got a few more fans through the door with their attendances in the 1 to 2,000 range, and plenty more good young players down in the dev centre to build a young team that should hopefully be able to challenge for a Champions League spot. I decided to stick with what had been working at Milford tactically, so our 4-2-4 system meant it was pretty easy to sell Special Meduna to Kaiser Chiefs for a club record 115,000 when they came knocking, and with so many good youngsters at the club, I didn't feel the need to go out and spend the money straight away. Adding a couple of decent free transfers and building the attack around Bartman and Ashley Cupido, plus Liam Byrne, who'd spent all of last season on loan at Uppington City in the second tier, and Schwab Martin in midfield, and of course, big Rushwin Dortley at the back for our set-piece threat. The media weren't amused with my lack of transfer activity though, predicting an 11th place finish for us, but at least we got out of Milford, who have some of the longest odds I've ever seen in FM and are almost guaranteed to go straight back down. We kicked the season off with a very satisfying 3-0 win away to Maritzburg, who of course beat us on the last day of the previous season when we were still at Milford to force us into the playoffs in the first place, and we absolutely thrashed them as well, even after having politely elected to play the second half with 10 men to give them a chance. We then got a reality check with a defeat against Sekukun United in the league and Mamelodi Sundowns in one of the many cup competitions, and we didn't look like scoring either of those games, so I panic signed a couple of old men to play up front and try and repeat last season's trick with Gamedi, bringing in Gabardino Mango from relegated Swallows and a 36-year-old Bradley Grobler who'd previously played for us 12 years ago before having a long career with Supersport United and 12 caps for South Africa. And the plan worked, with Grobler scoring on his debut in a 1-1 draw with Chipper United and again in a 2-1 win over Sundowns before Dortley scored the first of many headers from corners in a 3-1 win over Orlando Pirates to let them know what they missed out on by not hiring me. And we also got a big win over Royal AM to leave us second in the league after 6 matches. We kept our good form going through the first half of the season, and by the mid-season break we were still third in the league behind Kaiser Chiefs and Orlando, and with only 2 teams qualifying for the Champions League we needed to step things up in the second half of the season. Cupido was top scorer in the league, so we had the firepower to do it, but youngster Bartman had realised how good he was and requested a transfer, so if anyone meets his agreed price we lose out on one of the best young players in South African football for just £275,000. Thankfully we survived the January window without anyone meeting that asking price, which is certainly good for us on the pitch if far from ideal off it, because we've once again managed to run up £500,000 of debt in just 6 months, and now Rushwin Dortley also wanted to leave to go to a bigger club. But we came back from the mid-season break on fire, winning 10 of our 11 remaining matches and reaching the semi-final of the South African Cup, leading us to what theoretically should be a Champions League qualification spot, but the end of season came and went with no notification that we were actually in it, but we were above the green line, so surely nothing could go wrong. In the end, it was nearly the end of July before we knew for sure that we'd qualified. We never did get a notification or any indication on the league table, but we were in the hat for the first round, and I consider that a good sign. Summer was all about trying to keep the squad together, in particular Bartman and Dortley, both of which we'd need to have any chance in the Champions League. And I hoped we would have a chance in the Champions League. The final was scheduled to be played here in South Africa, and Mamelodi Sundowns made it all the way to the semi-finals last season, whilst finishing 5 points behind us in the league, so we're better than them. Transfer-wise, we did very little other than wish Grobler well in his retirement. He was second top scorer for us last season, so the youngsters are going to need to step up and replace his goals, because there's no money to spend. We started the season well with some big wins in the league, including one over champions Kaiser Chiefs and one that was an 8-1 win over newly promoted again Swallows, who probably wish they hadn't bothered. And we comfortably made it through the Champions League first round, beating Bantu FC 13-1 over 2 legs. Insert Banter FC joke here. Do you see what I did there? I'm happy with that one. Rushwin Dortley really started to assert his dominance from corners with 5 goals in his first 8 matches, and both Cupido and Bartman were almost at a goal a game, along with Mango, who was close to 2 goals a game on average. But most importantly, we survived another window without losing any of our young stars, and with the form we're in, we were ready to attack the rest of the season. And attack it we did, cruising through to the Champions League group stage with a 6-1 aggregate win over Al Ittihad Tripoli, and winning the first trophy of the save, which was the MTN 8, which I think is like a fancy charity shield where the top 8 teams from the previous year all kind of play each other and then we win. But you know what? A trophy's a trophy. We're literally called Spurs. We will take any trophy that is on offer to us. And we continued winning in the league, hitting the top of the table after 6 matches with 6 wins from our first 6 games. By the time the January transfer window came around, we were doing so well that Dortley and Bartman no longer wanted to leave, and we were even able to spend some of the money we'd been hoarding on a new striker, Etiosa Ighodaro from Sundowns, for a club record £83,000, who came straight into the team, scoring 5 goals in his first 5 matches. By the time the window closed, we were 6 points clear at the top of the league and already qualified for the Champions League knockout rounds with 2 games to spare. We beat USM Alger from Algeria 5-3 on aggregate in the quarter-final, and ES Tunis of Tunisia 5-3 on aggregate in the semi-final to book a spot in the Champions League final against Al Ahly of Egypt. And this is when we find out the Champions League final in Africa is played over 2 legs. So even though South Africa are the hosts, we still had to do a 2-leg final, and we were at home in the first leg with Luke Bartman scoring after 9 minutes with a wonderful solo effort before Mango doubled our lead from the penalty spot after 18 minutes. We let Al Ahly back into it in the second half though, with them grabbing a goal back on 58 minutes, leaving them with just a 1-goal deficit to overturn in their home leg. And our day in Egypt didn't start the way we hoped, with us 3-0 down on the night after 26 minutes, making it 4-2 to Al Ahly on aggregate, and us with a mountain to climb. We got back into it just before half-time through joint top scorer Mango, but he got injured in the process, which left us without our 66-goal strike partnership of Mango and Cupido in the second half. Both of them were injured, and we needed an equaliser, which finally came in the 93rd minute through Riaz Nel, who made it 4-4 on aggregate and sent the game straight to penalties. With 2 of the first 3 penalties missed, the shootout also finished 4-4 and went into sudden death, with Liam Burns scoring our 6th before Al Ahly missed theirs, and we'd somehow won the African Champions League at the first time of asking in the most unlikely of circumstances, meaning step 1 of the Pentagon challenge is complete. Also, while all this was going on, we'd also won the Premiership for the first time in the club's history, and it was time for me to look for a new job. But you know me, folks, I like to play Football Manager as realistically as possible, so I wasn't going to just quit on the spot. We've built a great team here at Cape Town Spurs, and I'd be really sad to leave behind the likes of Cupido, Dortley, Bartman and Byrne. And plus, the club have been really good to me, letting me go all the way up to my Continental C licence and seriously improve my manager reputation. But I'm still only at 2.5 stars, and I think I'll stand a much better chance of getting a good job if I stick around and make sure these trophies stick to my profile and I get the reputation boost for them when the season ticks over. So I'm going to continue business as usual until I find a job that's worth leaving for. And as far as that next job's concerned, I'm thinking Asia should be my next step, and as a winner of the African Champions League, I should be able to get to one of the better Asian leagues. 1 down, 4 to go on my quest to complete the hardest challenge in Football Manager, the Pentagon Challenge. In the last episode, we won the African Champions League with South Africa's Cape Town Spurs, and now the job hunt begins for the next club in my journey, with my plan being to head to Asia and hopefully use my boosted 2.5-star reputation and National A coaching licence to secure a job in the top flight of one of the major leagues on the continent. So we're aiming for China, Korea or Japan. But I like to play Football Manager as realistically as possible. So I'm not just going to quit my current job and apply for everything that's available. Instead, I'll be carrying on with Cape Town Spurs, hopefully winning a few more things to boost my reputation a little more, whilst applying for interesting jobs when they become available. So with 13 months left on my current deal, we need to find something fairly soon. But we don't need to apply for any of the lower league jobs that are the only things available immediately after my Champions League win. I need to get started on what will almost certainly be my last transfer window in Africa, which ultimately ended with me not signing anyone, but most importantly, not selling any of my stars either. I want them all to still be here in South Africa nice and cheap, so I can take some of them with me to my my new club, wherever that ends up being. And on the topic of a new club, goodness me, has there been slim pickings over the summer. The majority of the Asian leagues run opposite to the schedule of South Africa, with their seasons going on over the summer. So they were just getting their season started when we won the Champions League. And although they're now reaching their halfway points, they still haven't had any big jobs come up. But there is finally a vacancy in the J League at newly promoted Fujieda, who find themselves in the relegation zone in their first season in the top flight. Despite my winning CV, Harry Kuehl's the favourite for the job ahead of me. He's currently managing Yokohama FC in a promotion push in the Japanese second tier though, so if he gets the job ahead of me, replacing him at Yokohama wouldn't be the end of the world. We had a little bit of an iffy start to the season with Cape Town, picking up only 1 point from our first 2 matches and sitting down in 9th place by the start of September, and it's pretty clear that both me and half the team are more focused on what our next step is going to be rather than performing for Spurs. And that next step is getting interesting because shortly after the Fujieda job became available, more established J-League team Sagan Tosu sacked their manager while sitting in 18th place in the league, and recent J-League champions Vissel Kobe sacked their manager after a poor start to the season. He was replaced by the manager of Shimizu S-Pulse. Even with their manager leaving, they were still sitting in mid-table in the league with 9 games remaining and board expectations to just avoid relegation. I applied for every one of these jobs as soon as they became available, but Shimizu were the first to interview me, and despite having some reservations over my lack of Japanese language skills, they were impressed with how quickly I'd become fluent in Sesotho and good at Afrikaans. So they offered me a 2-year contract, trebling my salary, and most importantly, promised me a £22 million transfer budget. My record signing in the save up to this point was the £95,000 we spent on Etiosa Ighodaro. We're entering a whole new world at a club with enormous potential. We've got £37 million in the bank, £22 million to spend, 100k a week in spare wage budget, and absolutely no debt. This club is built for me to have some fun. As we're already entering the final stages of the season, my initial job was just to steady the ship. We'd already been knocked out of both of this season's domestic cups, so we just had the final 9 league games to navigate. Despite sitting in 8th place, the media still expect us to end up 15th, and the board are happy as long as we're not relegated, which, considering we're 17 points clear of the relegation zone, shouldn't be too taxing, even for a club with only 1 win in its last 6 games. And in fact, if I can get the team firing quickly, we're still only 8 points behind 4th place and a Champions League qualification spot. So with my eyes firmly on the Asian Champions League prize, I loaded up the tactic that had served me so well in South Africa, posted roughly 1,000 job adverts to try and sort out the horrific coaching setup I'd been left with, and sent my one and only scout to cast his eyes over my old squad at Cape Town Spurs to see which of my boys he thinks could make it in Japan. We're allowed 5 foreigners in our squad in Japan, and the sooner 2 of those 5 are Bartman and Big Rushwin Dortley, the better. And we started with a bang, thumping second place Avispa Fukuoka 5-0 in my first match, and then winning again against Jubilo Iwata. Any Champions League qualification hopes were effectively killed when we lost our next 2 matches, but then 4 wins on the bounce, inspired by the incredible goal-scoring form of 19-year-old Kasuka Naito, who scored 6 goals in 3 games during this run, left us going into the final day of the season with an outside shot at 4th place. If we beat Kashima Antlers and the other results went our way, we could sneak in, and when 18-year-old Mitsuteru Morimoto put us ahead 14 minutes into his first start for the club, we briefly dreamed, but 3 Antlers goals early in the second half destroyed our hopes, and we ended up finishing the season exactly where we were when I arrived, in 8th place, so no Champions League for us next year. It turns out we'd stumbled across an incredible youth setup here at Shimizu that wasn't being used by the previous manager, so my first 9 games saw the introduction to the squad of not just Naito and Morimoto, but also 18-year-old right-back Yoko Suzuki and left-winger Naoki Saito, with several more 18-year-olds pushing for starting spots too. We'd also dipped into the transfer market for the first time, securing a deal for Liam Byrne, scorer of our winning penalty in the African Champions League final, scheduled to join for just £275,000 because Cape Town Spurs have no money. They were quickly followed by Luke Bartman for £350,000, Ashley Capido for £425,000, and Rushwin Dortley for £375,000. And basically, for less than £1.5 million, I'd ripped the heart and soul out of my former team, leaving them stuck down in mid-table, but assembled a little South African core of proven Champions League winners here in Japan to complement my exciting youngsters. We focused on even more exciting Japanese youngsters with the rest of our spending, bringing in 19-year-old midfielder Nozomi Watanabe, 19-year-old left-back Kensaku Izozaki, and 18-year-old midfielder Yosuke Yoshikawa, bringing our total spend for the window to just £4.4 million from the 22 million we had available, and we even sold £2.7 million worth of old men and fringe players, most notably Issa Callan for £1.1 million and 32-year-old Carlinhos Jr., who went back to Brazil to open up foreign spots for my South African boys. All of that meant we ended the window with a budget even bigger than the one we started with, and a much stronger team, with Bartman and Capito competing with youngsters Naito and Morimoto, and last season's top scorer Shoto Fujio for the 4 attacking positions, Liam Burns slotting in as our playmaker in midfield, and Rushwin Dortley as a 6'4" monster at the back. Bringing the reigning African Defender of the Year to Japan has got to be one of the best pieces of transfer business I've ever done, by the way. No idea how he's not ended up in Europe. Ashraf Hakimi finished 3rd behind him for African Defender of the Year. This guy's good. The media are less convinced by my transfers, presumably because of the low reputations of the South African boys, but we started the season well. Rushwin Dortley doing what he does on his debut, getting the equaliser away against pre-season title favourites Vissel Kobe, with Ashley Capito grabbing a 93rd minute winner in the next match. My boys were having an immediate impact playing in a system they'd already had so much success with. We lost only one of our opening 8 matches, and by the end of the transfer window were 2nd in the league, just 1 point behind Kobe, and the new team was starting to click. By the time the summer transfer window came around in July, we were 7 points clear at the top of the league, and Bartman had established himself as the best player in Japan, 3rd in the goal-scoring charts with 14 goals plus 13 assists, and an average rating of 7.71 from just 23 matches. And he'd also formed a great partnership with Fujio, who at 26 years old was having the season of his career with 15 goals, 8 assists, and an average rating of 7.67, putting him just ahead of Bartman in the goal-scoring charts, and just behind him in the average rating and assists tables. Bartman even made it into the media Dream 11, so his Japanese reputation was on the rise as well. Youngsters Morimoto and Naito both continued to impress, and Ashley Capito also got into double figures for goal contributions. But rather than resting on our laurels, we spent the summer window pushing on and trying to improve the squad further. We didn't want to just win the league, we wanted to put together a team capable of winning the Asian Champions League, which has so far been dominated by Saudi Arabian teams with their expensively assembled superstar squads. No Japanese team made it beyond the quarterfinals last season, but Vissel Kobe had been losing finalists the year before, so if we can build a team capable of comfortably winning the J-League, we'd maybe stand a chance. With all that in mind, we kicked the window off with the biggest sale in our history, with Mykola Shaparenko leaving for £6.25 million to one of those Saudi Arabian teams that we fear so much, Al Hazem, to free up another foreign player spot in our squad. 2 days later, we smashed our incoming transfer record too, signing fullback Shinya Nakano for £8.75 million, quickly followed by midfielder Sota Kawasaki for £3 million, 20-year-old South Korean international striker Park Seung-soo for £3.2 million, and midfielders Daiki Kaneko for £1.4 million and Toshiyuki Umimura for £1.4 million to give us very solid strength in depth throughout the squad. All of this brought our total spend for the season to £22 million, which was our original budget, but with £11 million of player sales to balance it out a bit, we ended the window still with a budget of £21 million and £37 million still in the bank, and most importantly, we were still top of the league with 9 games to go, and we were still in the Emperor's Cup too, the winner of that also qualifying for a Champions League spot, with the club looking good for a first J-League title in their history, and most importantly, Champions League football next year. And that all-important Champions League spot was confirmed with 5 games to spare, with a 5-0 win over bottom of the league Imabari, thanks to a Morimoto hat-trick. This guy is still only 18, and those goals put him to 13 for the season from just 17 starts. I think we might have a superstar on our hands here. The board responded by giving me an even bigger transfer budget of £30 million for the upcoming window, so now I just needed to repay their faith by delivering that J-League title. But before I could do that, I had my first big decision to navigate here in Japan, because for the first time in the save, I was headhunted by no less than last season's J-League champions, Yokohama. Undeniably a bigger club, it would have been a no-brainer last season to choose them over Shimizu, and would have been a much harder decision if they were going to qualify for the Champions League this year. But with them sat down in 10th place, going there just sets me back too far in my quest, because at best we'd go in there, win the league next year, and then play in the Champions League for the first time in 2 years, and at that point I'll have been in Japan for 3 years, won the league twice, and still never played in the Champions League, and we're here to win the Champions League. So that'd be mad. Having not even attended the interview, we won the league with a game to spare, beating Nagoya Grampus 3-0, with Morimoto and Fujio continuing to develop their partnership that's managed to push Bartman out onto the wing and Naito out of the starting 11 altogether. And then on the last day, we beat second place Kashima Antlers 3-0 to end the season with a 9-point gap behind us at the top of the league. Shota Fujio as the league's top scorer on 28 goals, Bartman top of the assist table with 19, and Fujio just pipping Bartman to top average rating on 7.75. We now had £30 million to spend to improve this team even further and make it competitive in the Champions League. And we had longer than expected to do it, because despite the Japanese season running from February to December, the Asian Champions League runs from August to May, so we wouldn't actually be playing in it for the first time until towards the end of the upcoming season. And if we made it to the knockout rounds, they won't happen until the middle of the season after. So in addition to signing players to improve our squad, our mission for the next several windows is to stop our young stars like Morimoto and Bartman being headhunted by European clubs before we have a chance to use them in the Champions League. With the squad already the best in the league, we didn't feel the need to do a lot of incoming business before the new season, only spending big on a couple of players from FC Tokyo, with 19-year-old centre-back and already full Japan international Takuji Akuda joining us for £5.25 million. And yes, I know he's a 5'6" centre-back, but this is Japan, and he has got 6'4" Rushman Dortley alongside him. I think he'll be fine. Along with 20-year-old left-back Yozo Kabari for £2.7 million. We managed to avoid losing any of our important players and just loaned out some fringe youngsters, and we were ready to go again. The media still only thought we were good enough to finish ninth, and Bartman somehow lost his spot in the Dream 11, but Akuda went straight into it and joins our other Japanese young superstars as part of a very bright future for the club, and a group of young players that should have improved even further by the time we hit the business end of the Champions League in just over a year's time. We started the season in incredible form, with Fujio scoring for fun, and by the time the transfer window closed, we were 4 points clear at the top of the league and hadn't lost a game. But we had spent some more money, this time on some more experienced players to keep some balance in our young squad and offer some strength in depth. 30-year-old striker Koki Ogawa arrived for £2.8 million, along with Takuro Kaneko for £4.1 million, Masaya Shibayama for £4 million, and Haruya Fuji for £4.8 million, while we sold a few of the fringe players who hadn't really worked out to make room for them. Once again, we'd spent more than £20 million on players, but ended up with our bank balance largely unchanged and loads of money still in the budgets. There's money in Japan, it seems. By the time the summer transfer window arrived, we were 8 points clear at the top of the league and looking good for a second title. Mitsuteru Morimoto had fully established himself as a star, still only 19, but the J-League's top scorer on 16 goals, just ahead of his strike partner Fujio, and Bartman was still an assist machine on the right-hand side. We were now finally starting to get the respect we deserve from the media too, with them now predicting a third place finish for us, with 4 of our boys in the Dream 11, Byrne and Akuda at the back, and Morimoto and Bartman up front. We spent big again over the summer and saw our first victim of our accelerated success, with Kosuke Naito, who looked like he was going to be a superstar when I first arrived, being sent out on loan to the K-League, having only started 1 game in the last year. Meanwhile, we added to our small collection of Japanese internationals, with Kaishu Sano arriving for £2.9 million to provide cover for Liam Byrne, along with a couple more backup players and the exciting prospect of 20-year-old centre-back Koshiro Oki for £4.3 million, who already has 6 caps for Japan. And this is now the squad that's going into the Champions League for the first time, almost 2 years after I arrived in Japan, and we're in a potentially challenging group with Australian champions Central Coast Mariners. Only 1 team from each group progresses to the knockout stages, and the entire competition is split into East and West until the final, but we have to be the best team in the group to qualify, and if we do, we'll be facing other East Asian teams, with the only time we could come against a Saudi team being in the final. In the end, we cruised through our group undefeated, the only match that wasn't a comfortable win, our final away game against Central Coast Mariners that we drew 0-0. But we have a tricky draw in the first knockout round against reigning Korean champions Ulsan. The Korean League is only behind Japan and Saudi Arabia on the competition reputation list for Asia, so this is effectively the 2 best teams in all of East Asia facing off against each other super early in the competition, with the winner looking like a pretty good bet to go all the way through to the final. And that all happens next season for us now, because whilst we were navigating our group, we were also finishing off our domestic season and ended up winning the league by 20 points, with Morimoto and Fujio scoring 47 goals between them to finish first and second on the goal scoring charts. The Ulsan Champions League games came before our domestic league started up again, and our transfer window had barely even opened when it happened. We did have time to add 1 player, 20-year-old Masahiro Arakawa, joining for £5.5 £5.5 million, and we shipped a load more youngsters out on loan again. Also, during the off-season, our South African boys went off to the African Cup of Nations and all came back with winners' medals, despite Luke Bartman never actually having played a game of international football. He's got a medal now. Rushwin Dortley also came back with only one foot properly attached to the rest of his body, meaning we'd have to face the Champions League knockouts without the best defender in the competition. The first leg against Ulsan didn't start great with us going 1-0 down early on, but Bartman equalised on the 25th minute and then helped force an own goal a minute later, and we took a narrow lead back to Japan with us, where we were always comfortable in a 2-0 win with goals from Morimoto and Bartman. Our reward for beating one of the best teams in Korea was a quarter-final against one of the other best teams in Korea, FC Seoul, and we were once again away in the first leg, and this game was bonkers. Injuries, disallowed goals, penalties, loads of yellow cards. It seems we're not the best of friends with FC Seoul, but we actually took the lead just before half-time for a Fujio penalty before 2 goals either side of half-time for Seoul saw them in the lead going into the final minutes of the match, before Kosuke Naito, freshly returned from his loan in South Korea last season, grabbed an equaliser, having only been on the pitch after an injury to Shibayama early in the match. Having survived a brutal first leg, we were pretty confident of getting a result at our place like we'd done in the previous round, but that confidence was long gone by half-time, with us 3-0 down and we just never got into the game. None of our stars turned up, and I've never missed a player more than I missed Rushwin Dortley in that game. And that was our Champions League run over for this year. We'd already qualified for next season's competition after winning the league last year, but these Korean teams look quite good. We're comfortably the best team in Japan, but struggled against 2 top Korean sides, so we'll give it another go with Shimizu next season, but I'm not against heading to Korea to finish the job, if that's what it takes. If the Korean lot are better than us, if you can't beat them, join them. The board, presumably sensing what I was thinking, immediately offered me a new contract, and although I considered letting it run down like I had in South Africa to make myself easier for other teams to hire, I decided to sign a new deal with Shimizu and effectively commit to winning the Champions League here. We still had a full domestic season ahead of us, so we made a few new signings, including the brilliantly named striker, Shuto Machino. I love that name, and set about winning a 3rd successive league title, which we cruised to even without Rushwin Dortley, who tore the ligaments in the same ankle he broke in his return match. And with a recurring ankle problem, I'm starting to worry one of our greatest heroes of the save might be done. Shuto Machino lived up to his name, finishing as top scorer in the J-League as we won the league by 25 points. It wasn't all rosy though. It seems Saudi Arabia has noticed us and decided to stop us rising up as potential competitors to their clubs in the Champions League, throwing their money around to turn the heads of our players. Over the course of the season, we lost young superstar Morimoto to Al Wada for £7 million, Naito to Al Fatih for £4.6 million, and right at the end of the season, Masahiro Arakawa to Al Taiwan for £9.5 million, less than a year after we signed him. He wasn't the only player to have a very brief spell with us either, as we used our new higher profile in the world game to attract a European up-and-coming star for the first time, signing Italian striker Tommaso Ibone from Como to replace Morimoto after a golden boot winning season in the Italian second tier, but he got homesick and ended up back in Italy at Empoli within 6 months. We comfortably navigated our Champions League group again, even with all this going on, finishing with 6 wins from 6, including a 9-0 win over Eastern AA from Hong Kong that included 5 goals from Ibone, demonstrating that he would have been great if he'd taken to Japanese life the way my South African boys did. Maybe I should learn to speak Italian and sign 3 more Italians to work with him so we can settle him in a little bit easier, like we did for them. Having seen so many of our Japanese youngsters ripped away from us by Saudi Arabian clubs, and not put off by the Ibone incident, we decided to cast our scouting net further to prepare our squad for the knockouts, bringing in Nigerian midfielder Daniel Daga, Ivorian right-back Frank Bamba, and a couple of new Japanese youngsters in Niki Umiguchi for £4.1 million, Tosunori Komatsu for £2.1 million, and Ryota Ochai for £1.8 million. The first knockout round draw saw us facing off against the team that knocked us out last year, FC Seoul. This time we were at home in the first leg, and Luke Bartman used the match as an opportunity to demonstrate why he'll forever be the true hero of the save, scoring both goals in a 2-0 win before a second leg that was reminiscent of our away game in Seoul last year. We went 1-0 down after 17 minutes before Sano equalised from a Bartman assist just after half-time. Bartman and Kato both had goals chalked off before Seoul grabbed a late winner in the 88th minute to make it 2-1 on the night, but 3-2 to us on aggregate. We had our revenge and we're back in the quarterfinals again, where we face a Cerezo Osaka side, despite being down in mid-table in the J-League that we dominated for the last 3 years, knocked Seoul out in the semi-finals last year before beating Al Ittihad in the final to win the whole thing. Without me even noticing at the time, because I was sulking and focusing on the league, a Japanese team had won the Champions League last year. It just wasn't us. We had to believe that if we could knock out the holders, which we should be able to based on league form, we could go on and win the whole thing. The first leg was a nervy 0-0 at their place before Shuto Mishino lived up to his incredible name, scoring twice in the first 7 minutes to put us in control. Osaka got a goal back just before half-time, but Bartman did what Bartman does in the 70th minute, grabbing our third and seeing us through to the semi-finals. It's now 4 years since he was a key part of our African Champions League winning team, and at this point, with Dortley never really getting back to his best and Capito drifting down the pecking order, only Bartman and Byrne are regularly featuring in this team that were still in that were from the team back then. Our semi-final opponents were Shanghai Port, who, like us, had never previously made it to the quarterfinals. We were feeling confident, and the first leg very much went to plan, with us taking the lead on 11 minutes through a Fujio penalty before Shuto Mishino doubled the lead just after half-time. The second leg was a lot tenser, though, with Shanghai going ahead after 17 minutes, leaving them just one behind on aggregate, and that's how it stayed until the 88th minute, when Takanori Takasu, our latest Japanese teenage sensation who we'd signed for £2.5 million from Gamba Osaka just a few months before, grabbed the equaliser to rubber stamp our victory and send us to a final against last season's beaten finalists Al Ittihad, who'd presumably be ready for revenge on Japanese opposition after what happened last year. Their squad includes the likes of Gabriel, Lautaro Martinez, Pedro Gonçalves and Jack Grealish, so they're certainly not going to be pushovers. And they showed it in the first leg in Saudi Arabia, injuring Shuto Mishino after just 2 minutes before scoring a winner in a tight game on 73 minutes through Lautaro Martinez, leaving us with a 1-goal deficit to overturn in the return fixture if we were to complete part 2 of our Pentagon challenge. And the second leg was just as tense as the first, with it still sitting at 0-0 in the 79th minute when Rushwin Dortley, starting only his 6th game in 2 years, rolled back the clock to score one of his trademark headers to put us ahead on the night and level in the tie before Masara Shibayama's 91st minute winner sealed the result for us, 2-0 on the night, 2-1 on aggregate, and we were champions of Asia with both Liam Byrne and Rushwin Dortley in the side, just like they had been when we won the Champions League down in South Africa, and they would have been joined by Luke Bartman as well. He hadn't been kept out of the side by injury, but ultimately he was replaced in the team by Shibayama, who scored the winner, so it all worked out all right in the end. We continued to dominate the Japanese league while all this was going on, and we're looking very good for a 4th league title in a row, but it's time for me to start looking for a new club. Just like with Cape Town, I'm not going to just resign from Shimizu on the spot. Instead, I'm going to wait for the right opportunity to present itself. And if we do stay until the end of the season, I might just end up as the greatest manager in Japanese football history, as I'm already 3rd on their Hall of Fame after 3 league titles, 1 Emperor's Cup, 2 League Cups, 2 Super Cups, and of course, this Champions League win. Although that doesn't actually count for the Hall of Fame, the Nation Hall of Fame, I don't think. I'm also 3rd on the Asian Hall of Fame, but have yet to break into the worldwide one or the English nationality one. Surely, though, I'm going to be top of all of them by the end of the save, which I don't think I've ever done before. So where next? I'm thinking North America is the logical next step, and looking at the CONCACAF Champions League past winners list, Mexico seems to be the best plan, but the MLS might be fun because I've never really learned the rules of the league. There's currently no top division jobs in Mexico available, but 1 each in the MLS and the Canadian Premier League, but none of them really excite me. I'm a 2 times Champions League winner with a 4.5-star reputation and a Continental Pro license at this point, so theoretically I could get any job in the world. So I'll just keep an eye on what's available, and whether I end up in North America, South America or Europe next, it needs to be a club that's already playing in the Champions League. 2 down, 3 to go on my mission to complete the Pentagon Challenge, the hardest challenge Football Manager has to offer. We've already won the African Champions League with Cape Town Spurs and the Asian Champions League with Shimizu S-Pulse, and now with my eyes firmly set on the CONCACAF Champions Cup, and as a man who already owns a pair of Kansas City Chiefs dungarees and various baseball caps for both the Chiefs and the Kansas City Royals, all because they share my initials of KC, there was only one destination I seriously entertained as soon as the Sporting Kansas City job became available in the MLS. In fact, having already ruled out the Canadian Premier League because winning the Champions Cup from there would be like pulling teeth, it was always meant to be that Sporting was the very first job to become available after my Asian Champions League win. So considering I'm now armed with a Continental Pro licence and a 4.5-star reputation after my exploits in Japan, I didn't expect them to say no to me. In fact, I'm fairly confident I'm already at the point where I could get a job at any club in the world. So we do have the option of jumping to Europe or South America whenever we want. But I've been looking for a way to make all this stuff a business expense for months. So it's off to the MLS we go. Well, one of the first things to appear in my inbox is the longest email in FM history, which contains a lot of waffle about things I don't really understand, like designated players, salary caps, general allocation budgets, off-budget slots, Generation Adidas, and minimum salary values. I'd soon learn that this email barely even scratches the surface. We haven't even mentioned the draft yet, so I made the executive decision that rather than being a nerd and learning the rules, I needed to hire a director of football to handle all the transfer and player registration nonsense for me. So I'm going to go full American, declare myself head coach, focus on the players we already have at the club and winning football matches, and make use of the transfer target feature in FM to just tell the director of football who I want and leave them to do all of the number crunching stuff that I don't want to learn. And as far as players go, we have a few good ones already at the club that we can build around. 22-year-old Irish international William McDonald is a young designated player. No idea. With 4.5 stars of current ability. Quinn Sullivan is a homegrown utility midfielder who looks like he'll be really useful, and Ben Old is actually in his prime and a current New Zealand international who can operate from the opposite wing to Sullivan. So our tried and tested 4-2-4 formation that we've been using so far should fit the players we have. With half of the season played, we're 8th in the 14-team Western Conference, which also translates to 14th in the 29-team Supporters Shield that the media expects us to finish 25th in, despite us finishing 9th last season. And all of that's fairly meaningless anyway, because the leagues basically are meaningless in the US. We just have to finish in the top half to qualify for the playoffs and then win those to get into the MLS Cup, and the winner of that are the team crowned champions. Presumably world champions, because America. And as far as Champions Cup qualification goes, that's just as complicated as everything else, with both finalists in the MLS Cup getting in, along with the top 3 teams in the Supporters Shield and the winners of the US Open Cup, which is what we won last year and why we played in the Champions Cup earlier this season, although we have already been knocked out in the second round by mid-table Mexican team Club Leon. So what I gather from all of this is that we're basically American Aston Villa. We used to be good years ago, but now we're a mid-table team who fluked a Champions League spot, and I've somehow got to turn that into a squad that can qualify every year and go on and win the competition, even though that's dominated by much better Mexican teams, all whilst not really understanding how to buy and sell players. Easy peasy. Oh, and I've got no staff at all. So we probably need to fix that as well. I lost my first game 3-0 against Nashville, but then beat Real Salt Lake 4-0 thanks to a Greg Brennan hat-trick, so I have no idea how good we actually are, considering those two teams are both in the top 4. We've also received our first trade offer from New England Revolution, who want one of my best players in exchange for £1.5 million of general allocation money. I don't know what that is. I don't think it's transfer fee money. Plus their first round pick for the draft next year and Real Salt Lake's first round pick for next year's draft pick as well, which presumably they got in a trade with them at some point. I have no idea if the draft is even worth doing, so no idea what the value of those picks is, but Quinn Sullivan's worth over £5 million, so I can't see how it's something I want to get involved with, so we decline the offer and continue searching for a director of football to handle all this stuff for me. And that man ended up being Claudio Reyna, off of Sunderland in the past, who's now nearly 60, but will hopefully find a way to smuggle his son into the club. We got to the end of the transfer window without him doing any business for me though, which, to be fair, he had only been here 3 weeks when the transfer window closed, and our form continued to be pretty mixed in the league, losing to New England but beating Colorado, and then we started playing in something called the Leagues Cup, which includes both MLS and Mexican clubs, and we made it through to the semi-final of that, which I guess bodes well for if we make it into the Champions League again, although we did lose to our MLS rivals Atlanta United in the semi-final of that one. With 10 games of the regular season remaining and no more opportunity for transfers or trades, our focus was now fully on making sure we qualified for the playoffs to keep up our hopes of Champions League qualification. Because as much as I like the idea of completing Step 3 of the challenge with Kansas City, if we're not playing in the Champions League next season, I'll realistically need to jump ship to a bigger MLS club or ideally a top Mexican team. And that threat of me heading south of the border seemed to be enough to motivate my previously inconsistent side, as we only lost one more game against Columbus Crew, incidentally, the only other MLS team I've ever managed on Football Manager on Non-League to Legend years ago. Ending the season with a 9-game unbeaten run that included 7 wins and actually led to us only missing out on winning the Western Conference by 1 point. Crucially though, in the Supporters' Shield, which is a weird combined league table of all teams across both conferences, our form had pushed us up to a 3rd place finish, which is enough to qualify us for next season's Champions League, so I don't need to jump ship just yet. And in fact, as the form team in the MLS, my attention was now turned to trying to win the MLS Cup, something Kansas City have only done 3 times before in their history. And as I'm sure you're already expecting at this point, the playoffs are weird. To get to the MLS Cup, we first had to win the Western Conference playoffs, something that the top 9 teams from a 14-team league qualified for. The first round's actually a wild card where the 8th and 9th place teams face each other for the right to get into the playoffs proper. Why they don't just put the top 8 teams straight in, I have no idea. We're not going to question stuff like that. The first round itself was then seeded and played over 2 legs. And so as the 2nd place team, we faced 7th place Real Salt Lake with our first leg at home. We took the lead midway through the first half thanks to a Salt Lake own goal before our left back Guillem Biro got himself sent off just before half time for trying to kill a man. Salt Lake equalised just after half time, and then we had a 2nd goal disallowed before Salt Lake also got a man sent off, and the match finished 1-1 and then went to penalties in the first leg. We went on to win the penalty shootout, but I had no idea what the implications of that shootout would be. Could we go away and lose 1-0 now and it still be a draw because we won the shootout? If not, what was the point of the shootout? I don't know what's going on almost all the time here. And thankfully, we didn't have to find out, because with 11 men for the entire match in the second leg, we were much stronger, going ahead for a Derek Lacerda penalty early on before Salt Lake equalised on the hour mark. Lacerda then scored a second penalty after 69 minutes. Nice. With Salt Lake chasing an equaliser, we scored 2 more late goals for the comfortable win. At which point, I figured out aggregate scores weren't a thing. And these first round matches were actually a best of 3 series, because of course they were. Because America. And the reason we only played twice was because we won both matches. 2 of the other first round ties went to 3 matches, one of which included Austin FC, who finished just 1 place below us in the league, but went into the semi-final against us less rested than we were, and it showed as the game went on, with us scoring all 3 goals in the final half hour as Austin tired. And presumably in the interests of keeping things as confusing as possible, this stage of the competition was now only over 1 leg, and we also got home advantage for the match, I guess because we finished above Austin in the league. And then we also got home advantage in the final as well against Minnesota, again, presumably because we finished above them in the league. Minnesota had actually played 2 matches more than us in the playoffs as well, because they had to come through that wild card thing after finishing in 8th place, and needed all 3 matches to get past Portland Timbers, who'd finished 12 points ahead of them in the league and had actually finished first in the league, and have already qualified for the Champions League, just like we have for next season. But were knocked out of this really early on, so can't be champions, despite being in the Champions League. With our home advantage and fitness advantage, we obviously thrashed Minnesota in the final 5-0, sharing the goals out nicely between our front four of Old, Sullivan, Brennan and Clark. So now we were Western Conference champions, despite finishing second, and had qualified for the MLS Cup against the Eastern Conference champions Atlanta United, who'd also finished second in their conference, meaning the best team in the MLS would be decided by a one-off match between the teams that finished 3rd and 4th in the overall league. And it was once again played at our home stadium, presumably because we had the 3rd placed finish in the Supporters' Shield compared to Atlanta's 4th. Also, don't get me started on how each conference played 34 matches, despite there being 15 teams in one and 14 teams in the other, and the fact that if everyone played each other twice, that only adds up to 26 games in one and 28 in the other, not 30. I don't know. I do not know. We started well in the final, with Brennan putting us ahead after 9 minutes before Atlanta equalised 5 minutes later. Then, just like in the first round, we had a fullback sent off for being a maniac, this time right back Ronald Hernandez. Despite being down to 10 men, we took the lead again on 26 minutes through Ben Old before Atlanta hit back again with another quick equaliser and then a red card of their own on 39 minutes. That's what you call an action-packed first half. We had a third goal disallowed just after half-time, and despite us absolutely dominating them, that's how it stayed for the rest of normal time. We outplayed Atlanta on every match stat, but got sucker punched in the 102nd minute with Atlanta grabbing the winning goal to become MLS champions and secure their own Champions League qualification spot, which they didn't yet have through the league. So everyone went home happy in the end, Atlanta with a nice little trophy, but we already had one of our own from the previous week, and we were all going to the CONCACAF Champions Cup, so we could probably carpool. But first, the draft. And I have no idea how the draft works, really, but checking our draft allocations, it seems that all we've got is the 28th pick in the third round. So the chances of there being anyone left that we'd actually want to sign at that point were fairly minimal, so I effectively ignored it and gave Claudio Reyna a list of players I'd like him to go and sign for me. He signed precisely 0 of them. In the end, there was a half-decent player left in the draft pool by the time we had a go. 22-year-old Cape Verde international centre-back Luis Teixeira, who'd been playing for FC Motown in the US lower leagues. So I guess we just steal him from them for free. Support grassroots football, folks. We brought in a couple of free transfers too, because I actually understand how free transfers work. And I also figured out how to do a trade, bringing in 19-year-old Brazilian centre-back Romarinho from Nashville in exchange for a first-round draft pick for next season, a second-round pick for the season after, and £2 million of that mysterious general allocation money that I still don't really get. Which seems like a bargain to me. I don't know. We supposedly also have a £13 million transfer budget, but I don't know how to use it. So the season started up again with us basically having the same squad as last year, plus a fancy Brazilian teenager, which I guess is fine because we nearly won the whole thing. And on current form, we're probably the best team in the country already. But how do we compare to the Mexicans? Fairly well, as it turns out, at least against the smaller Mexican clubs that I've never heard of. The first round of the Champions League saw us cruise past Tijuana 6-0 on aggregate. And in the second round, we faced Costa Rican side Saprissa, who we beat 8-3 over 2 legs to set up a quarter-final against fellow MLS side LA Galaxy. The first leg was in LA and we took the lead after 4 minutes through Quinn Sullivan, and it stayed that way until early in the second half when LA equalised, and then they took the lead in the 90th minute before Greg Brennan grabbed a crucial 94th minute equaliser. Unlike in the playoffs, the Champions League is aggregate scores, like normal football. A few days before that second leg, we played Galaxy again in the league and they absolutely smashed us 4-0, so we weren't super confident going into the game, but with our home fans behind us, we ripped them apart, gaining an XG of over 3 and missing a penalty just before half-time, but we couldn't actually find a goal. But it ended up not mattering because away goals still exist in America apparently, so despite only managing a 0-0 draw at home, that 94th minute equaliser in the first leg had effectively turned into the winning goal and set us up for a semi-final against a Mexican team I've actually heard of, Tigres, currently top of the Mexican League and reigning holders of both the Mexican League and the Champions League. If we could make it past them, we'd be feeling pretty good about winning the whole thing, but that's a big if. And going 1-0 down 3 minutes into the first leg at our home ground wasn't ideal. But we did grab an equaliser on 21 minutes before going behind again on 52 minutes. Derek Lacerda equalised from the penalty spot in the 90th minute, leaving us needing to win or get a high-scoring draw in Mexico. I started to get giddy after 21 minutes of the second leg when Ben Old put us 1-0 up on the night, 3-2 on aggregate, and then Lacerda doubled our lead just before half-time, putting us in the driving seat for a very nervy second half. That is until the 82nd minute when our 28th pick of the third round of the Super Draft, Teixeira, scored our third with an assist from trade signing Romarinho, proving I've become an expert at doing transfers in the MLS. Tigres got a consolation goal in the 92nd minute, but it didn't matter. We'd booked our spot in the final against Club America, 7 times Mexican champions, 2 times Champions League winners, albeit currently down in 16th place in the Mexican League. They'd had a pretty easy route to the final, not facing a single other Mexican team, and it was at this point that I realised where the final was being played. Right here in Kansas City! But not at our ground, at the Arrowhead, home of quite good knuckle scufflers, the Chefs. We basically had home advantage in the biggest game in our history, and I'd put it at about 50-50 chance that Taylor Swift will turn up for the game. We'd continued to play well in the league while all this was going on. We're sat second behind LAFC in the Western Conference, but none of that mattered. All eyes were on the Champions League final, the first one in the history of Sporting Kansas City, and we were ready. And the Arrowhead went bananas on 19 minutes when Canadian international Matthew Chonier opened the scoring before Scott Wen, another of my free transfer signings from the winter break, doubled our lead on the half hour. And from there, we just controlled the game and never really let Club America into it, and won the most comfortable, drama-free Champions League final in the history of the world. Probably pop my Champions hat on, I guess. And that was job done. Just 361 days after winning the Asian Champions League with Shimizu, I'd won the North American version with Kansas City and could leave the MLS as a hero before anyone noticed that I still didn't understand the rules and stood no chance at doing any long-term squad building. In fact, if I hadn't won the Champions League this season, I'd already decided my plan was to escape and head to Mexico, where I could do proper transfers. So this win just fast-tracked my departure a bit, with the planned next stop being somewhere in South America, most likely Brazil or Argentina, to give me the best chance at winning the Copa Libertadores. Unless, of course, something really tempting comes up in Europe and I decide to go there first. Just like with my previous clubs, though, I'm not resigning on the spot. I'll stick with Sporting until the right job comes up, and right now, the biggest job in South America or Europe is with Sheffield Wednesday. So as a 4.5-star manager with 3 Champions League wins under his belt on 3 different continents in just 7 years, I think I can probably do a little bit better than them. We've passed the halfway point on the toughest challenge Football Manager has to offer, the Pentagon Challenge. With the African, Asian and North American Cups already in our trophy cabinet, we now just need to tick off the Copa Libertadores and the UEFA Champions League before I can crown myself the greatest FM player of all time. Armed with my 4.5-star reputation and a Continental Pro license, I should be able to get an interview for any job in world football. So now I just need to pick the right one. I want a team that's already playing in their continent's top competition, and those jobs don't come along very often. There's a few jobs available in the top leagues in Brazil and Argentina, but they're all for teams in the bottom half of their tables. Meanwhile, in Europe, both the Lazio and Napoli jobs are available, but despite being historically quite big clubs, they're both only in the Europa League next year, so that's not really ideal. I think we can wait a little longer. And it was worth the wait, because before too much longer, 2 big jobs at big clubs, both currently in their respective Champions Leagues, became available. Juventus in Italy and Gremio in Brazil. I applied for both and sat back and waited for the interviews. In terms of this save, I wasn't really bothered which one I ended up at. They're both big clubs that I should be able to complete the next stage of the challenge with, but from a personal perspective, I was definitely leaning towards Gremio, having managed Juventus relatively recently in non-league to legend. But basically, whichever job offer came first was going to be my new home. And it was Gremio who came in with the job offer. They finished 3rd in the Brazilian league last season, which was enough for a Copa Libertadores spot. In fact, the top 7 in Brazil all qualify for it, so we shouldn't have any trouble getting into it each year. But they've had a slow start to this season and were down in 12th place just before the halfway point of the season, 7 points behind Santos, who currently occupied 7th place and that final qualification spot. So we'd have some work to do and less money than we'd become used to do it, as they only offered me a £5 million transfer budget, much less than I'd been used to at Shimizu and Kansas City. But I was never going to turn down a team that had previously won the Copa Libertadores 3 times, so it's off to Brazil we go. The media think despite our poor start, we should still qualify for the Copa Libertadores, and as you'd expect from Brazil, we've got some talented players to work with, including right-back Carlos de Barros, who's wanted by both Barcelona and Real Madrid, and Marquinhos off of Arsenal's reserves in real life. There's loads of 5-star potential talent in the development centre too, so despite starting with a low budget, we should be able to get some financial wheeler dealing rolling, and some of that is likely to be taken out of my hands, as similar to Spain, it seems every player in Brazil has a release clause, and worryingly, some of them aren't very big, with De Barros, for example, having a £185 million domestic release fee, but only £12.75 million to foreign clubs. So I suspect I'm going to get punished for what I've been doing to Brazilian teams for years and lose a lot of my best players without being able to do anything about it. And we don't have to wait very long to test the theory either, because within just a couple of days of my arrival, the transfer window opened. We had just enough time before it did to win our first match 2-0 to start moving up the league, but my plan for this window now is to basically spend the summer reacting to whichever players leave and and trying to replace them as best I can. The squad as it is should be strong enough to challenge for the title, but I suspect I'll never find out whether that judgment is right or not. So we settled down into a nice rhythm of winning most of our matches and climbing up the league table whilst waiting for the inevitable. And the first departure, as expected, was De Barros, who went to Arsenal for his £12.75 million release clause, and he was followed a few days later by Brazilian international centre-back Guilherme, who went to Brentford for his release clause of £11.5 million. The board only let me have 25% retained transfer revenue, so we couldn't go bonkers replacing them, but did spend a bit of money bringing in 30-year-old striker Saldana for £1.1 million, taking winger Emerson on loan, bringing in another old man striker in the shape of Luis Suarez, not that one, and Argentinian centre-back Gonzalo Escudero for £950,000. While all this was going on, we moved up to 8th in the league and knocked Ecuadorian side Liga de Quito out of the Copa Libertadores 6-2 on aggregate in the second round before facing the much tougher prospect of Argentinian powerhouses Boca Juniors in the quarter-final. We won our home leg 1-0 thanks to a 72nd minute goal from centre-back Raul Gustavo, and for a brief minute I dreamed of winning my third Champions League in just over a year on 3 different continents, but Boca ruined that plan by comfortably taking care of us in the second leg with goals in the 18th and 77th minutes, securing a 2-0 win, 2-1 on aggregate, and knocking us out of the competition. So now our focus was on making sure we qualified for it again next year, whilst continuing to try and minimise transfer damage while the European transfer windows were still open. Not that there was much I could do to actually minimise that damage. They're release clauses. I can't do anything to stop it from happening. Seems very unfair being on this side of it. In the end, we only lost one more player we'd have rather kept before the window closed, with left back Cuabano joining Guilherme at Brentford for his £10 million release clause. We also moved on a couple of old guys and some fringe players and signed a South African. Unfortunately, not Luke Bartman. We tried, but he's way out of our price range now, playing for Al Khalij in Saudi Arabia, but we did head back to Cape Town, albeit City, not Spurs, for South African international right-back Leonard Khumalo for £325,000. South African bargains are my new favourite kind of bargains. They're so cheap. Another nice little unbeaten run later, including a lovely 5-0 win over Internacional, and with 5 games to go, we're just 1 point behind 7th place Atletico Mineiro, but secured our qualification for the Copa Sudamericana for next season. That's the South American version of the Europa League. But realistically, if we have to play in that, we'll be jumping ship, because that's a waste of time on this challenge, and we just need to keep winning to secure the top 7 spot and the Copa Libertadores for next year. And in the end, we did it in style, stretching our unbeaten run out to 11 matches, picking up a couple more big wins along the way, including a final day 6-1 thumping of Santos, and we ended up finishing in 5th place, comfortably securing our qualification and ensuring I'll be here at Gremio for at least 1 more year. And of course, as soon as the season was over, the vultures started circling again. This time, my old rivals from Saudi Arabia rather than the Premier League. Right-back Samuel went to Al Ettifaq for £6 million, and centre-back Gustavo Martins went to Al Riyadh for £10 million. With a squad that was already looking good, we didn't need to do loads to bring new players in, so we went out and spent big on a star player, bringing in Argentinian winger Santiago Hidalgo for a club record £9.5 million from Independiente, and bracing ourselves for the weird first half of the Brazilian league season. Because before the league starts up again in April, we've got 3 months of playing in the State Championship, which is a whole other league in its own right, that will also feature this season's Copa Libertadores campaign starting midway through. Our only real rivals for the State Championship are Internacional, and we played them first, drawing 1-1, meaning that the ultimate champions would be decided by which one of the two of us could come closest to winning every one of the remaining games. We had to go through 2 qualifying rounds to get to the group stage of the Copa Libertadores, but did that comfortably, beating Paraguayan team Cerro Porteño 15-0 over 2 legs and Belgrano of Argentina 6-3 on aggregate in the 3rd qualifying round. By the time we'd qualified for the group stages, we'd won every game in the State Championship since the first one, but so had Internacional, but we were more interested in our Copa Libertadores group that contained Flamengo, Atlético Nacional from Colombia, and Colo-Colo Colo from Chile. We play each of them twice and the top 2 go through to the knockout rounds, so we were feeling pretty confident. So confident that we went out and splurged a load of the cash that we'd been accumulating on players to strengthen our squad, including 29-year-old defender Rafael Pontello from Flamengo for £4 million. With the youth setup we've got, I was more interested in buying players who improve us now. The youngsters can all develop from within the club and be sold on to keep a flow of transfer money coming in, but my plan was to build a stable, successful team out of the older players who'd never been quite good enough for the move to Europe, but who were as good as the up-and-coming youngsters currently. We ended up being the team that dropped points in the state championship, drawing 0-0 with Juventud, with a rotated side between 2 Copa Libertadores group games. How many different ways have I said that word at this point, by the way? Those games being a 4-2 win over Flamengo that convinced me we'd win the group, and a 1-1 draw with Atletico Nacional that brought me back down to earth. But as with so many of these tournaments in the Americas, the league is really just a warm-up for the playoffs at the end. So we faced Juventud again over 2 legs in the state championship semi-finals, this time beating them 4-1 on aggregate with a much less rotated team, either side of a 5-2 win over Colo Colo, and then faced Internacional in the final over 2 legs. They'd finished above us in the league stage, winning every match apart from the one they drew with us on the opening day, but we demonstrated how far we've come in just a few months with our new signings, beating them 4-1 in the first leg at home and then 5-2 away from home for the comfortable aggregate win, and we were state champions for the 48th time in our history. By this point, we were also top of our Copa Libertadores group with 7 points from our first 3 games, and having already played 19 competitive games this season, it was time for the league to start. But our focus was still on the Copa Libertadores. That's what we're here to win. So although our league form started slowly with just 4 points from our first 2 matches, we got a point away at Colo Colo and went into our 5th match with Flamengo, knowing that if the other result went our way, we'd both qualify regardless of the result. So despite getting beaten 4-2, we were through to the knockout round, albeit in 2nd place behind Flamengo. It was at this point that the Gremio board tried to tie me down to a new long-term contract, but with 18 months to run on my current deal, I had to back myself to win the big one before my current deal expired and turn down their contract to make sure I was nice and cheap for my next club to hire, either this season or next. With the distraction of the Copa Libertadores out of the way while we waited for the knockout rounds to begin, we got down to the business of winning league matches, and by the time the transfer window opened again in July, we were 11 points clear at the top of the table and into the semi-final of the Brazilian Cup, with 24-year-old striker Jonathan banging in loads of goals, along with Marquinhos and 26-year-old Jamaican striker Rosimir also playing at the top of their games, which meant despite our on-the-pitch success, summer would be spent trying to keep our best players at the club, with Marquinhos the first to leave, joining Lille for his £12.75 million release fee. On a low, he was joined by a few of the older fringe players who dropped down the pecking order. We actually managed to make it to the end of the summer window with no further damage being done, and a new goalkeeper in the shape of Lucao for £4.9 million to try and help us collect some more silverware. The second round of the Copa Libertadores put us up against Sporting Cristal from Peru, who we comfortably beat 4-1 on aggregate to set up a quarter-final with Argentina's River Plate. Having been knocked out by Argentinian opposition in this round last year, we weren't over the moon with the draw, and things didn't look great when River took the lead in the first leg at our ground midway through the first half. But we were saved in the second half by 2 of our old men that we signed exactly for this purpose, with Rafael Pontello grabbing the equaliser just after the hour before 33-year-old substitute Saldana grabbed 2 late goals to flatter us a little bit and set us up nicely for the second leg. And can we just take a moment to appreciate Saldana, who we signed for just £1.5 million? Those 2 goals were his 37th and 38th of the season in all competitions. So far, that is as well. So far. We started much better in the second leg, with Pontello opening the scoring for us again to make it 4-2 on aggregate, before Jardiel decided to take control of the game, scoring our second before River pulled it back to 2-2 on the night, but Jardiel completed his hat-trick with 2 quick goals around the hour mark to make it 4-2 on the night, 7-3 on aggregate, and demonstrate just how far we've come since this time last year. The semi-final saw us drawn against another Argentinian team, this time Racing Club, with us once again at home in the first leg. And what a nervy first leg it was. Racing Club took the lead just before half-time for a Khumalo own goal, before scoring an own goal of their own on 73 minutes for our equaliser. They showed absolutely no attacking ambition for the entire match and looked like they'd get the draw they came for until homegrown boy Nathan Fernandez, who's been with Gremio for over 10 seasons, scored an 89th minute winner to give us a slender lead going into the second leg. I expected Racing Club to show a bit more attacking ambition in the second leg, but once again they seemed content to keep men behind the ball and tried to cancel us out, made even worse by them taking the lead on 21 minutes, drawing the tie level on aggregate. But Jardiel equalised 5 minutes later, and that's how it stayed until they finally realised they were behind late on and tried to do some attacks, at which point we took advantage of finally having some space to play in with an 87th minute goal for Luis Suarez, not that one, and a 95th minute cherry on top from Rosamir, and that was his 45th goal of the season. I know we play a lot of matches in Brazil, but our top four scorers at this point, with the season not even over, have 45, 40, 32 and 24 goals respectively. We're quite good at scoring goals. And that goal-scoring form led us to the league title with 2 games to spare, with us 11 points clear and having scored over 100 goals in the competition. This was only Gremio's 3rd league title in their history and the first since the mid-90s, i.e. before I was even born. Having already won the state championship and made it to the final of the Brazilian Cup, the board and fans were all pretty pleased with how things were going, but we still had one more big day out, the Copa Libertadores final against fellow Brazilian side Palmeiras, who'd finished way behind us in the league, but did beat us 2-0 on the final day of the season. Still 0-0 at half-time, with us losing our playmaker Breno Biden to injury after half an hour. Neither team were really creating anything, and it wasn't until the 59th minute when the deadlock was broken by an own goal from Palmeiras winger Luis Guilherme to put us 1-0 up. And that was clearly the boost we needed, because we immediately scored again, this time from a good old shenanigans free kick, and that was that. Game over. Palmeiras became increasingly frustrated and just started kicking our players and accumulating yellow cards. But it didn't matter, because we'd won the Copa Libertadores for only the 4th time in Gremio's history, which is of course also the completion of part 4 of my Pentagon challenge. Usually at this point I ask you where you think I'll end up next, but this time we already know. We've already won the Champions League in Africa, Asia, North America and South America, so the next step has to be Europe. There aren't any massive jobs available in the major leagues in Europe right now, although Valencia and Bayer Leverkusen are both tempting, although maybe below the level of my now 5-star reputation manager. Today's plan is a very simple one, folks. Complete the Pentagon challenge, the hardest challenge Football Manager has to offer. We've already lifted the Continental Club trophies in Africa, Asia, North America and South America, which leaves us with just one continent left to conquer, Europe, and the UEFA Champions League. Without doubt, this will be the hardest one of the 5 to win, but it's also the one I've got plenty of experience winning before, with just about every series I've done on YouTube in the last 9 years ending with a Champions League win. Spoilers. But armed with my 5-star reputation and track record of being one of the greatest managers in the history of the game, it's time to head back to my home continent a hero. I'm not even going to consider clubs not already playing in the Champions League. I've got enough of a reputation to wait for a real elite level job to become available. But of course, the downside to that is that those kind of jobs don't come up very often, and looking at the available jobs, the only one that's currently playing in the Champions League is Bayer Leverkusen, who are currently in 8th place in Bundesliga. They did finish 2nd last season, but were 17 points behind champions Bayern Munich, and not exactly a team I'd expect to win the Champions League with within 2 or 3 years. But with nothing else available, I stick in an application, but kind of half-heartedly, hoping something else will magically come up before they offer me the job, ideally in the Premier League or La Liga, as they're the leagues that have dominated the Champions League winners list over the course of the save. Leverkusen presumably knew something I didn't know, because they took their time to offer me the job, but nothing better had come along by the time they did. I toyed with the idea of staying in Brazil with Gremio for a bit longer and waiting for a big job, but figured I could be wasting a full season by doing that, because the likes of Real Madrid, Barcelona, Man City, etc. only really change managers in the summer when their current guys either retire or take international international jobs. So I may as well have half a season in Germany, and who knows, I might fall in love with the place and decide to get stuck into a project. And to be fair, they've given me the kind of money that could lead a man to falling in love. I've got over £70 million to spend in the upcoming transfer window and a not awful squad. Usually at this stage in FM, you walk into a club like this and they're all way over 30 and you have to do a full rebuild. But this team is relatively balanced age-wise, although with our two best players both being attacking midfielders, we might finally have to abandon the 4-2-4 system we've been using since Milford in South Africa. And talking of things that have followed me from club to club, it's time you all met my little buddy, Wonka Loon, who I first hired as a performance analyst back at Shimizu. He's not very good at his job, but goodness me, does he love me. So when I left to go to America, he quit on the spot and then applied to be a recruitment analyst at Sporting Kansas City, quit again when I left there, became a performance analyst again at Gremio before applying for a transfer to the recruitment department when I advertised for an analyst there, and he walked out again when I quit to come back to Europe. There wasn't much in the way of staff when I got to Germany, but guess whose name was on the list of applicants for a performance analyst job at Leverkusen? My old pal Wonka. Wonka Loon, ladies and gentlemen, arguably the greatest hero of the entire save. We only actually played one game before the winter break, beating Cologne 2-1 thanks to a couple of goals from a 20-year-old homegrown striker, Emmanuel Hager. We're developing a bit of a knack for finding underutilised youth players at every club we manage. With the transfer window now open, a few of my older players want out for one last payday, which is fine by me, so we've accepted a couple of offers for Edmund Tapsoba, and we'll try and get an actual transfer fee for Jeremy Frimpong, who's out of contract in the summer and has no plans to re-sign. I headed back to Brazil for my first signing, bringing 21-year-old winger Diego in for £15 million from Corinthians, and Tapsoba went to Chelsea for £10 million. On the pitch, I decided to stick with a 4-2-4 after all, so Luka Vabancic has got on the transfer list, partly because I remember him being a bit of a flop in that Birmingham rebuild I did a few weeks ago, so can't really trust him, can I? We secured our qualification for the Champions League knockout stages with a 2-1 win over Sevilla and a 6-1 thrashing of Charleroi, but it wasn't enough to get us into the top 8 and skip around because of results earlier in the season. Domestically, we look pretty good when we're not playing Dortmund or Bayern, so I guess we're the third best team in Germany, which suggests we're unlikely to win the Champions League this year unless we do something pretty special in the final week of the transfer window. If someone could wake up my scouts, that'd be super. We managed to get £21 million from Arsenal for a 32-year-old Frimpong who only had 4 months left on his contract, so I'd call that some pretty good business, but nobody wanted Vabancic, so we're stuck with him for the rest of the season. We did bring in a couple of promising youngsters on deadline day, but seem stuck in that FM no man's land you sometimes find yourself in when you're at an almost top level club where the players that will actually improve you either don't want to sign for you or cost way too much money, so you kind of can't buy them. And you have to rely on youngsters that you then build up over a number of years, and it takes a while. I don't really want to take a while. We want to win the Champions League like this year, next year. Get this wrapped up. We drew Rennes in the knockout playoff, currently third in the French league. We went 1-0 down in a very tight first leg away from home just before half-time and would have been happy bringing them back to our place with just 1 goal to overturn, but then we gifted them a 94th minute second and the second leg started to look like a massive uphill battle. The second leg was just as close as the first, and it's pretty clear these are two pretty evenly matched teams, which is fairly alarming in the context of trying to win the Champions League. We're only as good as Rennes. We took the lead on 56 minutes, leaving it 2-1 to Rennes on aggregate. A goal finally came in the 91st minute, but it was for Rennes. So when we finally got our second in the 93rd minute, it didn't matter. We'd won on the night, but lost on aggregate, and we're a long, long way away from being a team that can win this tournament. So despite only having been here a few months, I'm now officially job hunting again. I'll obviously try and get Leverkusen into the top 4 so we can have another go next season, and I won't leave in a sideways move, but we're very much on the lookout now for an elite level club we can jump ship to so we can fast forward this process and not have to spend 3 or 4 seasons building this team up to where it needs to be. We won the majority of our league games for the rest of the season, qualifying for the Champions League again with a couple of games to spare. We ended up finishing 3rd in the league, and then 2 very interesting things happened. First, Pep Guardiola was sacked at Manchester City after 17 seasons in charge, and then we found out we'd somehow qualified for the new format of the Club World Cup, presumably off the back of our league finish as Germany were the host nation for it. I have no idea how it works. I don't see how we could have qualified through the Champions League or anything like that, so it must just be because it's in Germany. But this is a Club World Cup that of course includes all of the teams I've previously won Champions League with, even Cape Town Spurs. We've ended up being drawn in the same group as Shimizu, so I get to play against the team I spent the most time at for the first time ever. Sporting Kansas City and Gremio are here as well, and we've also been drawn in the same group as Manchester City, who I have just put in a job application for. I've never won this stupid tournament before, but if any team that I've ever had any association with win it this time around, I'm claiming it. Maybe I'll win it with Manchester City. Wouldn't that be a thing? Or maybe I won't, because by the time they even offer me an interview, we've beaten them 2-0 and also beaten my old club Shimizu to put ourselves top of the group. And it was genuinely wonderful to see my old buddy Shuto Machino again. We had a lovely old catch-up. Shimizu then went on to beat City 1-0 in the final group match, securing second place behind us in the group and knocking Manchester City out. They also finished 6th in the Premier League last year, which through sheer fluke, i.e. Liverpool winning the Champions League, they have managed to sneak into the Champions League again for next year. But if both my Leverkusen and Shimizu teams are better than them, is it really worth going to Manchester City? We knocked Chelsea out on penalties in the second round before City answered my question for me, offering me the job, along with the best youth system in the world and a staggering £8 million a week wage budget. It's an ageing squad that will need a freshen up to challenge properly, but with that kind of money, I can't say no. So I wish Leverkusen luck for the quarter-final against Milan and jump on the first plane to Manchester for my 7th and surely final club of the challenge. Wong Kar-loon carried my bags for me like the loyal servant he is, and without their inspirational leaders, Leverkusen lost to Milan and the Club World Cup remains the one I just can't win. So, Manchester City, they've got a few quid and have managed it terribly. They've got a player on over £500,000 a week who, to be fair, is very good, but I think I really do have to abandon the 4-2-4 this time to accommodate him. Gvardiol, Haaland and Foden are still about, albeit very old, and Gary Astles isn't the only top-level player the best youth setup in the world has churned out while I've been away from England, although some of them, like Kean Knight, are very overpaid and are going to be hard to get rid of as a result. So despite the attraction of that £8 million a week wage budget, we're maxed out on it, so we're going to have to clear out some deadwood before we can start spending, and we're going to need to spend. This team is lucky to be in the Champions League next season. 6th place would usually not be enough. By the time the first game of the season came around, we've managed to shift nearly £100 million of that deadwood, and although we hadn't actually signed a player yet, we had brought in 29 staff members to sort out the club off the pitch. Sadly, Wong Kar-loon wasn't one of those 29. He actually turned down a job as a performance analyst for the under-21s. He's just not good enough. He's not Man City first team level. I'm sorry, Wong. But he's fallen on his feet and is the new head performance analyst at PSV Eindhoven. Good luck, Wong. You will not be forgotten. We settled on a 4-2-3-1 formation to get highest player Astles in his best position, and with Haaland, Foden and Nico Williams joining him in the front four, we should score a few goals. We lost 2 of our first 3 games and none of those attackers scored a goal in any of them. And we also found it really hard to force the highly paid fringe players out of the club, so this hasn't been the one window rebuild I was hoping for, and our only signings ended up being a 32-year-old Rodrigo on a season-long loan from Real Madrid and another 32-year-old Mickey van der Ven for £18 million from Newcastle for some defensive cover. This is possibly going to be harder than I thought. We did slowly find our groove though, the main catalyst being a 3-1 away win against Man United in the Champions League, which was the first time the front four really clicked, with Haaland and Foden in particular running the show. By the halfway point of the season, we were 3rd in the Premier League, but well behind Liverpool and Chelsea and probably not in the title race. Luckily, the board are happy with a top 4 finish this season, and we should be good enough for that. We're also cruising along nicely in the Champions League, looking good for a top 8 finish despite a defeat against Borussia Dortmund, and by the time the transfer window opened again, I had nearly £200 million burning a hole in my pocket and an urge to start spending some of it. First, we sold a couple of key players who didn't really fit into my long-term plans, both to our big title rivals, to strengthen them. 33-year-old Phil Foden went to Liverpool for £46 million and 31-year-old Amar Dedic went to Chelsea for £32 million. I broke our club transfer record to replace Dedic at left back, spending £101 million on Francisco Javier Fidalgo from Valencia, and then added 18-year-old Croatian wonderkid centre-back Andy Kersner for £14 million, fully intending to have him as my starting centre-back immediately, despite his young age. Goalkeeper Ziad Ramadan joined us from Aston Villa for £90 million, which allowed Otavio to go back to Brazil. And then we added young Belgian winger Gregory Senchel for 35 million and 19-year-old fullback Iram Caballero for 31 million pounds to finally inject some youth in the squad. That's 290 million pounds spent, 216 million pounds sold, so not a bad net spend for the first season. And by the end of the January window, we were closing the gap on Liverpool and Chelsea in the league, and we'd finished 4th in the Champions League, giving us a bye through to the round of 16, where we were drawn against 18 times winners Real Madrid, which is not ideal. The away leg started perfectly with Gary Astles now nailed on as a starting attacking midfielder for us with Foden out of the way, scoring after just 1 minute, but some guy called Bellingham equalised on 15 minutes. Erling Haaland put us ahead again just before half-time, before Bellingham equalised again on 64 minutes. Bellingham then turned provider on 81 minutes, setting up Madrid's third, before Ramadan had me questioning his £90 million fee 2 minutes later, letting Madrid go 4-2 up and giving us a lot to do in the second leg. And it was just about all over after 12 minutes when Madrid went 5-2 up on aggregate from a Wirtz penalty. Erling Haaland tried to do it all on his own with 2 second-half goals, but then club captain Rico Lewis earned a spot on my enemies list with 2 pointless yellow cards, effectively handing the tie to Madrid just as we were getting back into it. We're not a million miles away from where we need to be to win this, and we obviously won't face Real Madrid in the round of 16 every year, but the dream is over for this season. And it pretty much knocked the stuffing out of us for the season domestically too, as we immediately lost to Chelsea in the league and got knocked out of the FA Cup by Liverpool. March 2034 wasn't my favourite month of this save, but at least we secured Champions League football again for next season with a couple of matches to spare, and I now had a really clear idea of what I needed to do to this team, and it wasn't going to be pretty. The board only gave me £60 million to spend, but we had loads of spare wage budget, and it was time to get rid of the old men. All the old men. And the first 2 out the door were nailed on starters from last year. Nico Williams going to Al Ahly for 51 million and Erling Haaland to Real Madrid for 49.5 million. To start rebuilding the attack, we brought in Rodrigo Mora from Porto for 42 million, but with over 100 million pounds left to spend, we were far from done. We sold almost 300 million pounds worth of established players that summer, with other notable sales including Van de Ven, who'd lasted just the 1 season with us, Gvardiol, who joined Haaland at Real Madrid, and Rico Lewis, who was sent to Chelsea as punishment for what he did to us last season. Lots of big fees and even bigger salaries off the wage bill set us up to go out and spend 400 million pounds on a proper Kev team. Luis Guillem joined from Palmeiras for 18.75 million pounds, and we got another wonder kid centre back to partner Kersner at the back, 18-year-old American Kurt Clark. Oscar Gluck, who'd scored a decisive goal for Real Madrid against us last season, arrived for £55 million, and we bought a couple of Chelsea's old men on the cheap to thank them for the £100 million they'd given us for Dedic and Lewis, bringing in a 31-year-old Marcus Leonardo as a backup striker and a 32-year-old, but still very good, Moises Caicedo to run our midfield. We then went full Man City, bringing in a Brazilian wonder kid on the cheap from one of our City Group partner clubs, and then raided Real Madrid again for Luca Guilarducci and went back to Germany to sign Brazilian international right-back Maicon from Leipzig. Welsh centre-back Daryl Harris came in from Atalanta to complete an entirely new look defence, and with the emergence of young England homegrown striker Salomão Machado as Haaland's natural replacement, the only player still in my best 11 who was a starter when I arrived a year ago is Gary Astles and his £500,000 a week wages. Rebuild complete, and the media consider us joint favourites for the league with Liverpool, and we've gone from our defence being our biggest weakness to having 2 defenders in the media Dream 11 and the 2 best wonder kid defenders in the world starting alongside them for us. And we opened our campaign in style with a 3-0 win over Premier League rivals Chelsea. They were so much better than us a year ago, but in this game we just utterly ripped them apart. We followed that up with a 5-0 win over Monaco, a 2-0 win over Anderlecht, and a 5-1 win over Rennes, before we came up against the team that knocked us out last year, Real Madrid, now with an extra Erling Haaland, who, following his move to Spain, now lives in Andy Kersner's pocket. 0-0 will do just fine. We kept Haaland and Bellingham quiet. We are learning. We rotated a little bit for Nice away and lost 1-0, so we've also learned not to do that again. But by the halfway point of the season, we'd already qualified for the knockouts and were also 7 points clear at the top of the Premier League, with Machado well clear at the top of the goal scoring charts and City fans already forgetting that Erling Haaland ever existed. With all our business done in the summer, January was a quiet one, with us just adding another wonder kid centre-back, this time 19-year-old Serbian international Zoran Babic from Partizan for 4.6 million, mainly because he's 6'6" and you can't teach that. We won every game in all competitions in January, ultimately finishing second in the Champions League and earning that bye to the round of 16 again, where we drew my former club Bayer Leverkusen, a team I'm sure a few folks in the comments section are still pretty upset I left. They finished second last season under my replacement, Gennaro Gattuso. He was sacked after a poor start to this season and was replaced by Vincent Kompany, who currently has the team sitting in 4th place in Bundesliga. So they've not massively progressed in the 18 months since I walked out on them. And I completely justified my decision to leave with a very comfortable 7-1 aggregate victory, setting us up for a quarter-final tie against Manchester United, who'd also emerged as our closest rivals for the Premier League title as well, under new manager Luis Enrique. We were unlucky to draw 0-0 at home in the first leg in a game we dominated, and I started to question the wisdom of selling Haaland, as we don't really have a viable backup to Machado. If he doesn't play well, we struggled to score. Dylan Harris scored after just 1 minute in the second leg at Old Trafford though, and we doubled our lead on the hour through a Levi Colwill own goal. Rasmus Højlund got a goal back just before half-time, but that was it. We basically cancelled each other out in the second half, and we booked our spot in the semi-final against Barcelona. And before we played that tie, we also celebrated winning the Premier League for the first time in 4 years, with us 10 points clear of United with 3 games to go. Manchester City are back. We were away at Camp Nou for the first leg of the semi-final and took the lead on 32 minutes through Seneschal after some great work from Machado before we were gifted a second a few minutes later. Barcelona got a goal back just before the hour mark but couldn't find a way through our outstanding defence for a second goal, allowing us to bring a 1-goal lead back to England, where we absolutely thrashed them. What a contrast to the Real Madrid tie from last year this was. Barcelona didn't get a shot on target in the entire match, and we rattled 4 goals past them for a comfortable win and a spot in the Champions League final. We are only 1 game away from completing the Pentagon, and all that stood in our way was Phil Foden's Liverpool, who we faced in both the FA Cup and Champions League finals. First up was the FA Cup, and Foden didn't even make the Liverpool squad. He's only started 18 games for them this season. Turns out we sold him at exactly the right time, because his replacement Astles has gone from strength to strength, and it was his through ball that set Machado up for the only goal of the game, and we'd won the double. Could we do it again a week later? Still no sign of Phil Foden in the Liverpool squad, but I do want to give a special shout out to 20-year-old Argentinian left-back Guido Megna, who after getting sent off in the FA Cup final last week, got sent off again in the Champions League final. What a hero. We opened the scoring shortly after through Archie Gray, and a 10-man Liverpool side just couldn't get into the match. In a similar story to Barcelona in the previous round, they were completely shut out by our outstanding back four, and they didn't get a shot on target in the entire match. We added 2 late goals but just didn't need them. We've built the best defence in world football. We use it to win the treble. We used it to win the Champions League and to complete the Pentagon in just 15 seasons. Who needs a goal scorer? Who needs Erling Haaland? And also, who guessed 14 seasons way back at the start? If you did, give yourself a pat on the back. I'm certainly giving myself a pat on the back for doing it. I've been playing Football Manager for over 30 years now. I've never tried this challenge before, and I have loved every minute of it. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. If you have, leave a thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments what challenge you'd like to see me do next. And of course, thank you very much for watching.